10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 434. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 434 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. I hope if you're in the States, you had a really good Thanksgiving. And for everybody all over the world, hope the beginning of your holiday season is going well. It's going to be our last series of 2024. Really hard to believe. Then we'll start fresh in 2025. And I'm really excited about this last series. It's a departure from some of the stuff that we've been doing. You guys know over the past year, I've been trying a lot of different things. And I'm really excited about trying this one. This is really going to require a lot of action on your part. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to introduce a concept to you that I really use with all of my students, whether they be private students in the various universities that I teach at, or the members of the Jazz Intensive, my online jazz education program. This is a concept that I think is absolutely essential to being a really good jazz musician and to learning in the traditional way. The way that I think jazz should be taught. And it is simple. It's 3 words, but these are 3 words in this order I consider to be the basic architecture for all jazz learning. And it's really simple. You ready? Hear, sing, play. That's it. Hear, sing, play. And if we follow this method for basically everything that we're learning, if we are trying to learn it orally, which really most of the stuff that we do, we should be learning orally. If you just keep that in mind, hear, sing, play, that is going to pretty much always lead you down the right path. Okay, so hear, what does that mean? Obviously, it means active listening, really trying to get that information to go into your brain through your ears, but not just hearing it. Like, we hear things all day, every day, whether we want to or not. Some things we really like hearing, some things we wish we didn't have to hear, right? So hearing can be a really, really passive activity, but what I'm talking about is a very active form of listening, right? Hearing, listening. Maybe we should replace it with listen. But basically, you're trying to get that information into your being through your ears, but being really discerning about how you listen to it, really paying attention, not doing anything else while you're hearing it, right? Maybe trying to form a mental picture of it while you're hearing it, but there is no physical action required on your part except to actively listen. Now, the second one does actually make you do something, and that is sing. But I want you to be careful. Don't jump to sing too quickly. I want you to think about, have I heard this enough? Have I listened to it enough? Do I think I can sing it? And then you want to translate it into your voice. So what does this do? Well, obviously, your voice doesn't have buttons that produce the right pitches. We've talked about this extensively on the podcast. So really, you're testing whether you actually can hear this or not by trying to recreate it with your voice. This also does a couple of other things. We want to recreate it with our voice, not only with the right pitches, but with the correct syllables. Right? We want to make it sound like what we are hearing using our voice. And this is a crucial step to any of you that aren't happy with the way your style comes across on your instrument. You should really be singing a lot more and trying to figure out what syllables produce the closest results to what you hear. And then naturally, those syllables will transfer over to your instrument, which is obviously a little bit more complicated. Depending on what instrument we play, if we're playing saxophone, we have to figure out how to tongue. Same thing on any wind instruments. If we're playing piano or a keyboard instrument, we have to figure out how to strike that key. If you're playing guitar, you have to figure out your amp settings, how you want to use your pick, whether you want to use a pick. This is all stuff that goes a long, long way toward making what we play a lot more effective, a lot more stylistically grounded, which I've found is a huge frustration of so many of the students out there. Okay. Then we get to the fun part, play, right? So now we've heard, we've sang, and now we can finally play, and we should be in much, much better shape than if we had just jumped to playing initially. So how are we going to translate that into this month's assignment? Well, here's a thing that a lot of teachers have done with me, and I've done with hundreds of my students over the years, that has always produced massive results. And that is every week or every lesson, I will teach them a short section of music, a phrase or two or three, 8 bars, let's say. I will teach them an 8-bar, for lack of a better term, etude by ear. Then they will have to go and they will have to remember that thing that I taught them for the next lesson. The first thing that they'll have to do is play it for me when they come into their next week's lesson. And then we will add on to it. And basically, I'll give them 8 bars of material a week. We'll add on to that. And eventually, in like a month, which is what we're going to do here, we'll have 32 bars of material that was never written down, ever. So a lot of what I do in this podcast is I'll write you an etude, right, at the end of the month. We're going to try this a little bit differently. Over the next 4 episodes, I'm going to teach you 8 bars at a time, but I'm never going to write anything down. And your job will be to, this week, learn 8 bars. Next week, you're going to take that 8 bars. You're going to make sure that you still remember it. And then we're going to add 8 more bars and so on and so forth through 4 episodes. And by the end of the month, we should have an entire 32 bars of material learned 8 bars at a time by ear. And you will have an entire etude that was never written down. Now, as I mentioned, I had a lot of teachers that did this for me, and that's why I started doing this with my students. But I've also heard legend that this was how Joe Henderson taught. And if you went and you studied with Joe, this is exactly what he would do in the lessons. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but it makes sense. And like I said, I've never failed to get results with students. And I've never seen a student not improve through doing this kind of work. So it's on you, right? You're going to have to dedicate some time this week to learning this 8 bars through the hear, sing, play method, but then also being able to remember it. Because remember, next Friday, I'm going to hit you with the next 8 bars. Now, here's another thing. I'm not going to tell you what progression I'm doing this over. Once you start to learn the etude, depending on what level you're at, you might know right away, or you may have no idea whatsoever. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Okay, that's not the thing that's important here. The thing that's important here is to follow the instructions, learn the 8 bars by ear, and be able to remember it and be able to play it without thinking. That's it. All right, because then you're going to be ready for the next 8 bars. Now, it's also going to get a little bit more difficult as we go on through the month because you're just going to have more and more material that you have to be able to remember and play before the new material. But I promise you, if you take your time and you do it with a lot of care and a lot of repetition, you're going to be just fine. Okay, because it's only 32 bars of material. So this is going to work a lot of muscles. First, obviously, it works your ears. It's going to work your ability to memorize things. It's going to work your technique on your instrument. And that's why this exercise is so great. Okay, so let's actually dive into it. I won't have to explain so deeply on the next 3 episodes. I just wanted to let you know what we're doing here. Okay, so I'm going to play 2 versions of it. One's going to be on piano with a metronome. And then the next one's going to be slightly faster on saxophone with no metronome. Now, the Patreon members are going to get a ton of examples. You're going to get all these examples of piano playing it with metronome, without metronome, at all these different tempos. You're going to get a bunch of examples of saxophone playing it at all different tempos with and without metronome. And basically what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give you as many tools as possible to make learning this as easy as possible, right? So I want you to be able to hear it at all these different tempos on 2 different instruments with and without the metronome so that you can get it into your head, so that it makes the process of then putting it on your instrument that much easier. I'll talk more about the Patreon stuff at the end of this, but let's hear the 2 examples. First will be on piano, second will be on saxophone. Okay, so there it is. That is the 8 bars that I would like you to learn for next week. Be able to play that so that you are ready for the next 8 bars that I'm going to show you next week. Be able to just rattle that off, right? And then all you have to do is you have to take that phrase and put it at the beginning of the next thing that I'm about to show you. Hey, and now you got 16 bars. Okay, so that's your job for this week. As I mentioned, if you're new to the podcast, I mentioned the Patreon membership. We don't do ads on this show, so the way that we support ourselves and the way that we get these learning materials to our members is through the Patreon platform. And you get all of the learning materials by supporting us for a small monthly donation each and every month. You get instant access to all those downloads. And in this case, this is going to be really, really useful for you because you're going to get a whole bunch of audio files, again, with those various instruments at the various tempos, with the metronome, without the metronome. And it is going to make this process about 100 times faster. So if you want all those materials and you want to support the show, you like what we're doing here, go to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, or go to patreon.com and search for the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Once you get signed up, you will get instant access to the stuff for this episode and actually every single episode that we have ever done, which is obviously quite a few at this point. So again, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, or patreon.com, search for the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, and you can get started on learning this stuff right away with all of those really, really useful materials. Shout out to some new patrons this week. Thank you to Desmo, Gary, Harry, Rachel, and Don. Thank you all so much for joining up to support the podcast and become part of the family. And of course, to the over 350 people we have over there supporting the show, thank you. We couldn't do this without you, and you're the reason that these shows keep coming out week after week. So have fun with this stuff. Again, very, very simple instructions, but are you going to do it? That's the question. I hope you do, and I'll see you next week on another episode. Bye, everybody.